You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing bread drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing light. Hello and welcome to Dark Loops, the Seers of Ardham, a podcast in which we, the Seers of Ardham, discuss HBO's fantastic new series, Lovecraft Country. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist philosopher from Illinois State University. Tonight we're discussing episode 4, A History of Violence. Joining me in tonight's discussion are the other members of the Order. Brothers and sisters, please introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little something about who you are. Vanessa.
I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz, licensed clinical psychologist here in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area, also a professor of psychology, a diversity consultant, and professional geek. Welcome. Hello.
Cianna.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. I am a podcast and broadcast radio producer for a public radio station out of Baltimore, Maryland, WYPR. Hello.
Stanford.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I am, former archaeologist, sometime comic creator, and full-time cultural anthropologist, coming to you out of Chicago.
And Byron.
And I'm Dr. Byron Craig. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Communication at Illinois State University.
And unfortunately, our dear friend, Dr. Leandra Parris, was not able to join us tonight, but rest assured she will be back next week. So let's just go ahead and jump into it here. I'm just going to pick one of you. You tell me your favorite character, your favorite scene, or your favorite line, and we'll take it from there. Cianna, you seem to have pretty strong opinions, so we're going to start with Cianna.
I did not like this episode, so I'm going to have to dig really, really, really deep.
All right.
Favorite character, I would probably say, is Miss Hippolyta.
Mm-hmm.
I just like the shade and the side eye that she was giving everyone. She knew they were shady every time they opened their mouth. Yeah. I thought it was so hilarious. She's like, all right, shady acid. And I'm excited to see what happens when apparently, what it looks like is that she and Misty will be heading to Devon County.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to see what happens with that. I'm interested to see what happens with the Ori. I loved her interaction with her daughter Dee at the museum.
Yes.
But other than that, I mean, it was just wall-to-wall foolishness with everybody else this week.
It was what it was. On that note, we'll skip to Byron. Favorite character, favorite scene, favorite line.
I don't know how to follow that. Because I'm on the line about the episode also. I'm just like right there on the border with it. But I have to say my favorite scene. I think my favorite scene was when I think between father and son at the very end, them talking, it was just something about that kind of father-son love. But then, of course, it switched to him killing, right? Cutting someone's neck, which I've gone back and watched maybe about 600 times because I hate those kind of violent scenes. Just like remember that was the first time I watched Game of Thrones was at the Red Wedding episode. Right. I would never watch that show ever again. Right. But for some reason, I keep coming back to that scene because I love that kind of like play of father-son love and then that killing, right? But I have to say my second favorite scene is Diane, is the mother and daughter then in the car driving to Devon County, right? So it's kind of this juxtaposition of father-son, mother-daughter. And I really like that play there. But yeah, I have to say those are my two favorite scenes of the episode.
I'm going to go ahead and follow up on that. My favorite scene was actually the first scene with Montrose, the very opening scene of him watching television and then him suffering by himself. And the things we do when we're suffering, when we're alone,
versus the things we do when we're suffering with other people. And my favorite line also comes out of that. I'll save that for later. But I think this was Montrose's episode. I think this was about him. And I think it opens up with him trying to maybe make us understand why he's so harsh with Atticus, which then is supposed to explain why Atticus is so dismissive of, Lydia at certain points. And I did like how they started trying to make us understand the depth of his trauma, suffering at the beginning, so that later in the end, when he has this sweet moment where it sounds like he and his son are going to go off and do these things together, he says, "Oh, no, we're not. I'm going to stop this right here so my kid doesn't ever have to deal with this again." And so for me, it was Montrose's episode. There were a lot of other, great things going on with other characters, but I love that opening scene, and I actually have some of the lines from when we get there.
I think there was a lot between Montrose and Atticus this episode that I did like, just through their whole little quest underneath wherever they were in the museum, underneath in Chicago. I don't know, it was confusing, but wherever they were, I feel like that whole quest, there was a lot in between them that passed, like from anger to sadness to all of it. It was just, there was a lot of it there. And Michael K. Williams, that's his name, right? Michael K. Williams, he is amazing. Like anything that he is,
I agree.
so awesome. He plays, yes.
Yeah, there's always an instant seriousness to his presence. It's always important, and it's always now. So Cianna go ahead, Stanford.
What I thought was interesting is about how, on one hand, this was about us getting insights into Montrose, but I felt like this episode left us more questions about Montrose than we ever had before. And I thought it was also interesting, and I think we're going to be coming at this in some other areas, that it was even like within the characters, we're constantly questioning Montrose, and especially around Montrose's sexuality, they had the one person hinting as far as because the bar owner we already know is queer, and hinting that so is Montrose. And then when Montrose is talking to the guard, and Atticus is just like, is that really what, did you really just, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's interesting because it's being done in a way in which Montrose doesn't quite get that he's being questioned. And I have mixed feelings about that, right? I just do, because what it does is that I think that when a character misses that they're being questioned, that it doesn't speak well of the writing, and it doesn't speak well of the character.
Drop the mic again.
Every time.
Yeah, I get the questions bit. We're going to learn more about him as we go. I still thought that, and I get some of the things that he was thinking as he was sitting there suffering was crossing different times, and giving us an insight as to the traumatic life that he's lived. So there are more questions to be answered. I have to say, at the same time, I felt like that initial scene perfectly explained the final scene, when we've been led to believe that now there's this healing going on and they're going to do this and that, and he goes back and he kills that because he didn't want. When they met in the restaurant or at the bar, he was horrible to Atticus. When are you going to stop doing all the? We're just doing what I say, and in the end, what he's trying to do is just keep Atticus out of harm's way. And doing it by being that hostile. And I think the slitting of the character's throat at the end is another example of, keep my kid out of this. I'm going to keep my kid safe from this, and consequences be damned for myself. And so,
yeah, you wonder, is he really? I guess I'm questioning: is he really fulfilling his brother's wish, or is there something more sinister about him, about Montrose, right? And I wonder, and I'll say the one thing that I have a little how can I say this? A little issue with is there something sinister? And are they playing on this queerness to suggest something sinister also, which I'm kind of on the fence with that. And I was actually on a discussion with some people earlier about a lot of people were saying, why did that episode have to be so queer, right? And I was like, okay, let's come on, people, let's get past. I think there were some homophobic tones in that conversation that bothered me a lot, and so I had to call it out. But at the same time, I wonder, is there, I'm sure HBO's not doing this. I'm sure it's not happening, but I had to question that. As a queer person, I'm hoping that we're not seeing again, the whole thing that happened with Sharon Stone in, what's the name of the film? Oh, you youngsters probably weren't born yet.
Basic Instinct?
Yeah, Basic Instinct, right? There was a whole backlash about, about Sharon Stone's character in that from the LGBTQ plus community, right? But, and I wasn't so sure if it was, if that pushback was fair or not. But, it's this question about, are we connecting queerness with something sinister? Right. And so I'm hoping that doesn't play out to be that way. I don't think it will, but I am interested in seeing, I think you're right. There's absolutely something interesting about this development of the Montrose character in this show. And I can't wait to see where they go with it. Because he is this father. I think it's almost like he's trying to, like he really wants to protect the family. And I'm not sure if that's where it's really going or not, but we'll see.
Well, I think part of what's going on is, okay, as far as the representation of queerness, because this is an episodic story, whether or not they intend to engage in some problematic narratives in terms of queerness with the overarching story does not change the fact that they managed to step into some really problematic shit in this story. And because in every moment where queerness is evoked, something happens afterwards. It's as if like you had the writers thinking in terms, they're thinking in terms of, well, when things when the borders get blurred, it's like something happens to just either eliminate the border or just like cover it up. I mean, the fact that somebody could be undermining Atticus's relationship with his father by questioning his father's sexuality, right? That's not a small move to make on somebody, right? And it's something that's so obvious. Like you don't have to be queer to see that, right? You don't have to have any special experiential insight to see that that's what's happening right there. And then when you have what's her name or their name at the end?
Yahima.
I mean, Yahima is like within that context, the ultimate in ambiguity. And we solve the problem. We solve a perceived problem by eliminating her altogether. And it was interesting because and there's also a voyeuristic element to it, right? Like this is the first time that we ever see full frontal nudity, and it's to make sure that we know that she's got different parts, right? And there's a way in which they could have gone from that scene and had you not ended it the way it did, you would have, I think, in your mind, you would have read her difference much differently. But at the same time, it's like all this stuff is moving against Montrose, because I had three favorite quotes, and two of them were by Montrose, and the two Montrose quotes pretty much sum up his entire character arc in this. And it's in the beginning when he says "smells like Tulsa."
Yep.
Just a straight up reference to trauma. Yep. Right. And it was actually when they were in the when they were in when he was in the bar with Atticus and Letitia, and he says, we're the Reds in this fight. That means outnumbered, outgunned, fumbling to catch up, right? Mm-hmm. What he's done in that moment is he's laid out where he thinks they are, and you also see a foreshadowing of his future actions in that statement. Because what he's trying to do, it's clear he's trying to get ahead of something, but getting ahead of something at the expense of another human being is obviously a problem, right? And for all of that, it just that was actually like the thing I liked about this episode, but it's also the thing I didn't like about the episode. And so I came out kind of indifferent, and then the way they portrayed archaeology kind of pushed me over the edge in the other direction. So
I got to follow up on the Montrose bit there, because when Atticus says how you know there are 34 lodges, right? What I'm starting to feel like is going on is that Montrose is the leader of a war against this brotherhood. And we don't know that about him yet. And he knows the stakes they play at. And so he knows the stakes he has to play at if he's going to survive what these lodges do. At least that's the vibe I got. In terms of him like killing the person at the end, I thought that was a way of telling us how deep his rage and trauma were, that he's got this fight, he's got the fight, and it's so intense that this is deemed necessary in that fight. Now that's the vibe I got.
Would you say that he's like intentional, or like he is masterminding, like, okay, I'm, like you said, he's the leader of this fight and he's masterminding it, or he's just kind of throwing haymakers in the dark? He doesn't really know. He's just sort of doing.
Well, what I also loved about this episode was the conversation Hippolyta had with her father when she was describing the orrery, right? And it's clear that she and her father have a lot of experience with astronomy, right? And they're talking about it, and it's clear that then this family very much has an informed sense of the cosmos. Mm-hmm. And this order, and Lovecraft, is all about cosmic horror, right? So creatures coming from outer space, from other dimensions, that just completely drive our world mad. So I wouldn't be surprised to find Montrose being intentional in the sense that he knows what's going on. We've seen a little bit because we saw Ardham, we saw what happened in the house. So we've seen, but he knows stuff that he's not telling anyone. That's the vibe I got. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's just the vibe I got. And it's like, okay, so once you're done with the Raiders of the Lost Ark bits, then we'll get to.
I think that's the thing that I like. I think that's the thing that I liked about the episode, though. I'm not really sure how to read Montrose, and I think that's on purpose. I think there's something else there that we're not seeing, that we're not going to see yet. So I think there's much more to that character. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with him. I do have to say, the one thing about the end is, again, I'm going to go back to, I had a real issue with the queerness killing the queerness. That was just a little problematic to me. But I still think there's something else beyond that, right? I think there's something else there. I mean, I guess maybe I'm hoping there is that we can get beyond that, or that I can get beyond that scene somehow. Because that, the possibly queer Black male killing a two-spirit indigenous woman, I don't know, there's something, but I mean, I think there's plenty of explanations for it, but at the same time, it just left me kind of like, okay.
I totally agree. I'm absolutely certain that my experience was a giving the benefit of the doubt experience to the writers, but if they don't make this work out in a way we respect, I suspect we'll come back to this episode and really harp on this point later and try to bring it out. So Vanessa, favorite character, favorite scene, favorite line?
So I'm going to do two quick ones. One, because I think it flows into what we were just talking about. But my favorite line was actually when they first encountered Yahima. Yahima, is that how it's? Yahima.
Yes.
And Montrose says, "What are you?" And Atticus says, "No, who are you?"
Yes.
And I think that I was like, yes, because I think that it was indicative of issues of alternative sexuality. Like people's interests are so like inappropriate at times, and so it's like, okay, no, like this is a person. So that just subtlety to me was something that I feel like was really, really awesome. But my favorite scene, and it was like 2 seconds, but I can't believe I'm gonna say this, it involved Christina. And when she went in the house and then William came out, I'm like, they're the same person. Like, that is a theory that I have, and I Googled it, and other people think it too. I really think Christina and William are the same person, and she does some magic and becomes him because men can move more freely in the world, which makes the whole dynamic with Ruby also interesting, but I think that Christina is William and William is, that's why they look like creepily like twins.
You mentioned that like first episode too, right? I mean, it was you mentioned that early on. Your comment there about what and who, that definitely relates to what we were talking about with Montrose earlier. And that line is intentional, that distinction is intentional. And it's saying something both about Atticus's character and Montrose's character. And it's clearly Montrose has a dehumanizing worldview. And given the extent of the trauma and making the reference to Tulsa, you sort of see, I don't know if what they're trying to do is talk about trauma giving rise to dehumanizing views. That's the vibe I got, right? That they're trying to...
I understand that. I mean, this is where the show sort of trips over itself. They make that distinction. You have Atticus correcting his father, but the show itself is being incredibly voyeuristic and incredibly dehumanizing to Yahima's character.
To Atticus?
No, to Yahima.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
I mean, I just thought that shot of, as Stanford said, that full frontal nudity. I mean, it just seemed very voyeuristic, very cheap. I don't know. And then Atticus clothing her. I don't know. I had a lot of issues with that scene and the way Yahima was treated. And why were there no subtitles? Why were there no subtitles?
I can't disagree with you on that one.
I also
is Yahima dead? Because let's remember when we found Yahima, they were a dried up corpse on that Willie's table, and I don't know how long Yahima had been there. And then I don't know. Is Yahima dead? Are we supposed to? We're supposed to infer that Yahima has been murdered?
If you can, I mean, go ahead, Byron.
Some people have asked this question about. Remember that people were asking about is George really dead? I mean, I just wonder with all of this, is Yahima? I mean.
And was Letty dead? Letty was like, I died. Did she die? I thought that was just magic. That was just a glimmer.
Yeah.
And she said, I died. It's not all about you. I was like, oh, girl, did you? I didn't realize that she was actually dead. Was she?
I mean,
were we supposed to?
I wonder if they're playing with this notion of death in this show. So they're playing with this idea of death in a way that we don't know yet.
They are being poetic with death, right? I mean, when they were in the basement, Letty said, "You're not dead yet," and we all said, "Oh, that's a cool line, right? Because they're dead." Right? So when she says you're not dead yet, they're making the concept poetic, and I'm not sure where to go with that right now, because given we're watching a ghost story, you don't know if that means they're spirits, and that means you just don't know what it means yet. I don't.
Travel.
Cianna, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No. That was it.
Okay, Vanessa, you mentioned Christina. When she knocked on the door and tried to walk right in and couldn't get in, that was awesome. No, that's right.
That was, I loved that scene. It was just like.
But that blood mark had been put there
in the previous episode. Here's
Right.
what I loved about that. This is that moment. It's like, no, we got power too. You go ahead and bring on all your religious stuff you want, because we got it too. And that just sort of, it brought a dimension to the relationship that wasn't there before. And because all we've ever seen is the Bright Whites put spells on them. And now you see, no, we have spells too. And you didn't see what happened in the basement, so you don't get it yet. But, we have spells too. And it was just like that, right? And so I thought that was a really cool, really important scene. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a arms race referred to come to be a magic battle somewhere over the course of the.
I want to see the Letty Christina let's get it. No magic, just like let's get it, like Mortal style. I don't know.
And she was trying to.
Things.
Go ahead.
One of the things that was interesting though is, online everybody is quoting Letitia saying, it's not all about you. It's not all about you, Atticus, right? Or you're not the center of the universe. And I actually liked it. I actually liked that line better when it came from Christina. And I liked it because of the context, because it's Christina and it's Letty. And in some ways they're both very similar characters in that they occupy a privileged space within their race and gender, right? And I reference the colorism that we've been talking about having, in the show, where Letty's the light skinned girl with the good hair, and then when you start getting into aesthetics around beauty and whiteness, it's like it's the blonde, right? It's the twiggy blonde that kind of has the little extra bit of privilege, right? But still in a not so privileged position, because you're talking about women in a man's world, right? I put that in air quotes. But just the way she said that, because the details I thought were really interesting. She said, "Don't let the men fool you into thinking it's always about them," right? And I thought that was really interesting because when Letty says it to Atticus, she's critiquing an individual, but when Christina says it, she's critiquing a system. And then the follow-up actually doubles down on that, because it's like, his blood may have power, but that's only because Titus spelled it that way. And I like how spelled is like a double entendre, casting a spell versus also spelling, and then she says it doesn't make him special, so what she's basically, so that all of those systemic references, because now it's really just saying, okay, we're here, we're not ever going to get along, and one of us is probably going to kill the other, but this is the world that we're in, a world where we can be fooled into thinking that we're nothing. I love that line.
I just have reactions to that more so because of, like, when you think about feminism and how, like, white women's feminism and black women's feminism are two different things. And so I think that even in that, Christina was like, yeah, girl, like me and you. But no, because when we talk about, like, women's sort of like right and all of that, white women got a whole different agenda, you know what I'm saying? And so in that moment, I like, none of the sort of like feminist in me was like, yeah, girl. And I don't know if it was because of the added intersection of her being like a white woman and sort of like like we talked about before, and sort of like white women's complicity. And it's like, yeah, girl, like suffraging, until black women come to, and it's like, oh, not y'all, just us. You know what I'm saying? So I think I like the way that you sort of just laid that out. And that was in my mind, that was the reaction I was getting the whole time. It's like, she a white woman, you know what I'm saying? And like how that intersectionality can't be ignored, you know what I'm saying?
But I thought what heightened that, and actually what feeds into your point, was the fact that they were doing it in a situation where there was a barrier, where Christina can't go any further than to look at her. They can't do anything but talk. So there's no okey doke to be done, right? in that particular situation. And so I actually loved that it was said in that particular situation where both of them were truly relegated to different corners.
Yes.
There was no space for it, and they were at this point where they were completely canceling each other out. There was no space for the okie doke, and so that was what allowed me to kind of have that feeling.
But so can I, Stanford? Can I ask you a question? So do you see? But do you with them in their own separate corners and separated by that spell, right? Is there still, can we still read some kind of power differential in that moment? And it's kind of like what you were talking about, Vanessa, but I just wonder, does that barrier, does it keep us from seeing the power differential between those two still, I wonder?
I felt like in the moment it neutralized it, because in the end, Christina could not do what she wanted to do. We saw her agenda get stifled the moment she walked in and couldn't walk in. It was her intent to walk in that space, walk right past old girl, and take whatever she wanted. And she couldn't do that. And she had to acknowledge it. Because she hits it, and then she looks, she sees that there's a spell there, and she's like, well, I can't, you know what I mean? It's just like, and that's what I thought was interesting about the moment. In the moment, I felt like it was almost like they're on this neutral, hallowed ground where like whatever power they came with, that's it.
So what do we know of that? So let's go outside of the door just a little bit onto the sidewalk, right? Where we see the chalking of, right? What does it say? Black here or black? Yeah, black's here, right? So does that then give us any kind of, does that signify any differential, I wonder? If we take it off the porch and outside the door, are we being told then that, because did you all see the photos of the actual like chalkings that would happen on the streets? Yeah. I guess it was supposed to be in Chicago that said blacks here, but the arrow was pointing a different way though. It was pointing out toward the street, interestingly. But in this scene, that arrow was pointing toward the house, right? Right. Pointing toward the house. But so I just wonder, does that then start? Is that supposed to give us that feeling of power and powerlessness there?
See, I think the okie doke occurred once Christine realized she couldn't get in, and then she goes, "Oh, but come on, we're both women." Right? Don't let the men. So she's trying to do to Liddy what she did to Atticus, right? Oh, so the okie doke, the bodily okie doke just walking in doesn't work. So she goes more verbal and tries to do this stuff. The thing is, Byron, the power differential's there. In this place, Letty is safe. And she's not just safe because of herself. She's safe because of the magic, because of the culture that was in that house and put that spell on that space. But once you're out of that space, the power differential kicks in immediately. That's the vibe I got. She had to walk up there, bang into the wall, and that's the only place she couldn't go was in that house. Then she starts playing, don't let the men tell them it's all about them. And so I thought there was okie doke. It's just didn't work.
I think the okie doke, if Vanessa's theory is correct, that Christina and her brother are the same person, the okie doke was obviously going through Ruby and using Ruby as an instrument to, exact her power over Letty. Which, going off of what Byron was saying about queer characters being casted as sinister, I mean, yeah, I don't know why, sort of like when we were talking about Ruby and colorism, I think an episode or two ago, I was, well, we'll discuss it the following week because, I was hoping for a course correction. Right. And I'm still holding out that hope for how the show will address LGBTQIA issues. But I don't know why I don't like the casting of Ruby and Montrose, who are the darker skinned characters. in the show being casted as so sinister and angry all the time. All the time.
No.
Ruby had such a light in episode 1, and there has just been this downward slope. And I just don't, I'm really, really disappointed with that. If this is going to come down to a physical, like Ruby versus Letty situation, I would be very, very disappointed. But I think that's the direction that we're going in.
We have
Montrose, this anger and rage.
Yeah.
And I'll just go into my favorite line, which was when Montrose and Atticus, after Atticus and Letty had their falling out in the cave, and Montrose has that really, really sweet, tender moment with Atticus where he says, you guys have to pick a favorite song, and he says, you sing it, and then when it's all through, you can get back to what matters, which is the loving, because that's what the fussing is anyway. It's a whole lot of loving. And it was a really, really tender moment, and Atticus reaches out and, touches his father's shoulder. And again, Michael K. Williams is such an amazing actor. Such an amazing actor. The way he's able to pivot emotionally like that from like scene to scene, second to second, really, really amazing. I think he's kind of being, he's a little wasted in this character, or he will be wasted in this role if all he does is yell and scream and murder and just, I don't know. Because he obviously is a complex character. He loves his son, but I just don't understand. And I thought Ruby just, what did you guys think of that scene? I was so disappointed.
With you mean the scene?
With Ruby and what is the brother's name? William.
I have to say that I had that written down as probably like her dialogue there. I had that written down.
Her dialogue was fantastic.
Okay, so I had that written down as my favorite scene, actually. And it was just kind of that look. So I'm telling you, a lot of this episode for me was, and I was talking about this earlier, it's this notion of power and who's not in power and disempowerment. Because there was something in that scene with the way, and again, I'm so unsure of everything because I think there's such a play. This episode was about family and about gender and sexuality and sexual, like, so much about it, just about, queerness and all this, that it was just so full of all this for me. But when she says, for us, it's a rat race to the finish line, and it's winner takes it all. And I damn for sure know that, I had to write it down, know that if I was your skin, I guess if I was in your skin, I wouldn't even have a run. I wouldn't even have to run. What I don't know is what to do about it. You better stop looking. I just love when she said, stop looking at me like that. It ain't happening, white boy. I love the way she says that, delivered that line. But for me, I guess that was it. Probably for me was probably the more historical moment of the show, I guess, with her grappling with, after seeing the other sister working at Marshall Field, right? And the pain she's dealing with, I don't know if it's because she wanted to be the first Black woman to have that position, or, if she was just really pissed off at Letty at that moment, because she waited to go apply for the position, or what it was. But it just seemed like right now she's grappling so much with, with what it means to be a Black person, a Black woman, in the United States at this moment. And I think that probably is what makes her guard be let down and go back to that house. And that wasn't their house that they went to, right? That was the mansion that they went to.
I think it was their town house, their Chicago house. Wasn't
I honestly don't know what house they were in.
I thought it was Letty's place. I did. I thought it was Letty's place.
Because I saw some people saying it was Letty, some people saying it was the other mansion.
Well, if Vanessa's right about them being the same people and using William to get in the house, then I would assume it was.
Okay. But that's the whole thing, though, right? If we're talking about this in terms of power dynamics, this is all a farce. It's all a big okie doke. It's all about the illusion of power. Because we're seeing that our characters of color are actually really powerless. The money that Letty thought came from her mother, that came from the Braithwaites.
Right.
You know, I mean, the way that Ruby is obviously being set up to betray her sister by Christina/William. I mean, it's just, I mean, it was a lovely speech, but I mean, in the end, it was just a big farce. And it starts from even just Montrose going to Devon County in the first place, going to Ardham in the first place, just to be locked, shackled in a dungeon. The way Christina used Atticus to kill her father. I mean, it's just one okey doke after another. It's just all about the illusion of power. And right now, the white people in the story are holding all the cards.
Byron and I spent a lot of time yesterday talking about our experiences of The Watchmen. And I have to say, I'm watching this show from the perspective that it's going to Watchmen me. Right? I'm watching this show with the assumption that this is going to blow my mind. So every moment that I'm seeing these things that are questionable, it's like, okay, they're setting me up for that big reveal, you know, who's Dr. Manhattan, and I'm just gonna go. But if that doesn't happen, I have to say, there'll be disappointment that kicks in. These things that are being mentioned here have to pay off. Like they have to lead to some kind of insight and major important issues later on. Otherwise, it's damn.
Yeah,
I'm really curious. I'm really curious to see what happens with Ruby, because, I mean, I feel like in her character, I mean, I'll say this, she and George are my favorite characters, and George is not dead.
I have to agree. I absolutely love, whenever she's on the screen, it's 100% authentic.
Yeah.
There's a power there.
And one thing that was nice, even though the circumstances were not ideal, and that's an understatement, is to actually see Ruby as an object of desire. Because throughout this entire series so far, the only object of desire has been Letty. You know, with the character, actually the character that I'm just liking less and less is Atticus. I think he is boring and stale, and it's like he was just cut straight out of genre, masculine, you know, strong silent hero type. And it looked like he was going to be something else when it first started. You know, it starts off with his dream, him reading books and all this stuff. And then it was like, got to Chicago, and it was just left all that behind. And he's just a bohunk.
So are we done with the first act? Are we done with all the character establishment that goes on in the first act? And now we're moving on to Empire.
Yeah.
What's that?
I think we're definitely into the second act now.
Okay, so this is where all the character turmoil really comes to its peak. So, like, to see the way Montrose oscillated this episode, right? We can see why he's oscillating, and where that goes come the end of the second act could be in this terribly tragic space that generates epiphanies in Atticus and such. I'm assuming we're just kind of in that spot. And like I said, I'm just watching this as if I'm going to be Watchmen and assuming that it's going to come out that way. So absolutely.
It's a little time for me to see Atticus with the anger. I mean, the scene where he jumps out the car when what's his name wants to hitch to ride to Boston, and he gets out the car and he's just like, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm just like, What is all that anger? I guess it bothers me to see him, even in a scene like that. And again, you know, and I keep trying to defend it because that article from the Atlantic bothered me so much. I'm like, you just watched, you know, that they were invited to watch 5 episodes. And I just, I really didn't like that article. It bothered me some. And so it made me think, okay, I need to be more calm about Atticus because, you know, I didn't like Atticus from the beginning. I talked about him being my least favorite character on our first podcast. And It's just in that scene when they got out the car, I kept rewinding it, saying maybe I'm reading this scene wrong, but it was just like this anger. I'm like, well, why the anger? And he actually is very angry towards that man. Remember in the first episode when he goes into the bar, and I think that's the same guy that comes.
Yeah,
up to him. Yeah. So there's something. I know that. I guess I'm assuming there's something there, but I'm just thinking that once we're past this episode, I think. Well, I'm hoping that I didn't agree with the premise that we're not getting. In the article, the writer talks about there not being enough character development. And I don't know what to think about that. I'm not sure, is there enough character development or is there not enough character development? I don't, I guess for me, I'm assuming that this is going to be a show that's more than one season, possibly.
Well, in terms of character development, what I've seen of Atticus so far is he seems to be fairly sexually insecure.
Maybe that's what anger is then. I don't know.
The guy that he yells at is the guy that came up to him and asked him if he could go out with Letty at the party.
Right. And that's the guy that is at the museum with him.
And it's also that moment plus him seeing her dance with the other guy that leads to the bathroom scene. And when he sees her, I would argue, kind of distraught afterwards, doesn't comfort her. These are spaces I don't think he knows a lot. At least from what I've seen, that's how it seems like they're trying to depict him.
Well, the thing is, when they introduced that,
very immature. How old is Atticus supposed to be in this?
I thought he was like mid-20s.
Right.
Isn't he like 27-ish?
I have no idea.
I thought it was like 27.
When he expresses anger, it really does come off as a temper tantrum. Like in that scene in the second episode, when they were having breakfast in the atrium, and he was like, "Oh, the monsters," and he was like screaming and carrying on, and George had to tell him to like, "Be cool, my guy." Like,
yeah.
Was he? Which war was he in?
Korea.
Oh, so maybe he has PTSD or something.
And it's interesting because that's exactly when I see him, that's what I see. Like that anger to me is like conflict. And it's like for a lot of black men, like their depression comes out in that way. So when I see him, it's almost like a manifest, not to therapize him, but that's just what I do. Also, I have to admit that I am biased when it comes to him because he is beautiful. But I think that
those pants.
I love his character because I think that his anger and his sort of like, you just see him brimming under the surface. Like if you push him, he's just gonna go like just like I feel like so many people that come to therapy, especially people of color, just being black in America, that is their every day. And I think that he also like talks about, and his daddy said something to him when he came back, I think it was the first episode, about going to war for a country that doesn't like love you. And so he went over to Korea and he's fighting, and whatever happened with that woman in Korea and like all this stuff happened to him, and then he comes back home and nobody gives a damn, and you still got to sit in the back of the bus. And I feel like all of that is just like, and then I think on top of that, this sort of like generational thing between him and his dad and Uncle George, and like the scene in the first episode when they're in the diner and Uncle George's like, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna be cool, and he's like just ready to fight or leave or whatever. Like I think all of that is like brimming under the surface, and that's why we see it's like, sir, regulate yourself. But I think he can't because of all that's like internal. And so I see him as troubled or like conflicted. And so I think that's why for me it's just like, oh, he need a therapist, like that's how I see it. Like, get a therapist, my dude. I'm available. If you need someone, I'm available.
I just feel like what Byron was saying about character, are you referring to that Atlantic article by Hannah Georges?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so episode 1, Lovecraft Country made a lot of promises, rich characters, magic, sci-fi fantasy, an exploration into the trauma of racial inequality and racial violence, and it's only delivered on racial inequality and racial violence, honestly. And I don't know if I want to keep tuning into that every week. If that is all this show turns out to be, I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I don't understand any of the magic in the show. I don't know how it works. I was so disappointed. I mean, the minute they got into that vault, which Stanford brought up a very good point when we were talking about it this week, like it really should not have been that easy. He was like, not a single janitor walked by that statue on the night of a full moon.
and Montrose jumped on the thing and he caught him. Like the plank is this big. Caught a grown man. I was like, really? Nobody slipped a shoe?
No.
Oh, like, what are we doing?
We only lost.
I'm going to say the archaeologist to me was appalled. Just appalled. First of all, the rank stupidity of like everybody at the museum to not notice that, like, if the lights go off, we get this laser thing that shoots, and I mean,
exactly. For how long?
I mean, I don't.
Nobody.
I didn't finish my PhD for that stuff. I mean, I just got to have eyes. I don't even know if I got to have eyes for that.
Right.
You know, one thing I thought was interesting was that this was the Raiders of the Lost Ark episode. And what they did was they really brought home the fact that Raiders of the Lost Ark was never, ever meant to be in an hour, let alone the half hour that they tried to condense it into. Because the whole genre is one where, like, each of the traps, you notice are usually spaced out 15 minutes apart because it's a cliffhanger. Like, it's that cliffhanger where you think they're going to die, you pause, and that's how it, like, kind of gets you all into it and gets you going. But they managed to screw that up.
Well,
and that's the easy stuff.
Right on through. I mean, they just sort of, I mean, Indiana Jones got caught a lot.
And he studied that stuff.
How's he going to get out of this one? How's Indy going to get out of this one? He got caught a lot. These were just sort of, I mean, and they didn't, it was just lazy. All the door puzzles. I mean, can it be a puzzle? What's the puzzle?
If it's that easy to get in, then how come it's still there?
All right, look, guys. The Watchmen fan in me is experiencing that scene as making fun of Raiders of the Lost Ark, making fun of how white people depict difficulty in movies. That's the Watchmen wanting to watch a person in me, right?
Lost Ark was excellent.
Well, it was. I'm not saying it wasn't, but it's camp. It's camp danger. You know, it's made for Saturday afternoon matinee, and it's fantastic. I love it. I watched it 100 times.
Again, when the first scene, this dream sequence that Atticus has in the first episode, I was promised camp. With the UFOs and the Martian Queen and Jackie Robinson, I was promised camp. You should deliver on that.
Oh, you know, well, see, I thought that's what that was.
I was all about it. I was promised camp. I was promised, a lot of, serial type, 50s pulp sci-fi. And
I think we're about to see it, though. I think it's going to turn a corner. I think it's turning a corner because I think with Hippolyta and Little Miss Diane turning around, I think we're now about to see it because I think we're about to get into some time travel. I think this week was also like I paid homage to Jules Verne and H.G. Wells in a way. And although I agree, I think the whole thing was kind of cheesy, but I wondered also beyond it just making fun of those movies, was it also saying Black people are going to get through this quicker?
Okay, so I'm gonna my favorite bit of folklore that Zora Neale Hurston writes about is how the crocodile got his skin, and it used to be the case that the crocodile had beautiful white fur. And the crocodile was hanging out on the side of the bayou, just lounging around in its fur. And a rabbit came by and said something like, "How do you get to just lounge here?" The alligator says something like, "Oh, well, you know, I'm beautiful. I had this great fur," and the rabbit says, "So don't you ever get scared? Don't you ever feel danger? Don't you?" And the alligator says, "Crocodile says, I don't know what danger is." So he falls to sleep, and then the rabbit starts a fire all around him and says, "Here, there's your danger." And the crocodile jumps into the swamp and gets burned and jumps into the swamp, and that's why his skin. For me, it was just a little bit of the camp was there, but it was also what's danger. And again, that's the Watchmen person in me wanting it to be, you know, maybe bigger than it was. But yeah, okay.
I am just hopeful that it's going to turn the corner. I'm hopeful it is.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. This episode should have been 2 episodes. Because the whole thing about how, you know, they never even do any explanation in terms of like, oh, they go to Boston, they go into this secret vault that nobody can get into, but they just kind of stumble in by accident. And then when they're about to drown, they just go into the elevator and it takes them to Chicago.
I like when Letty's like, "Oh, that's my neighbor."
You know.
Oh, okay.
Oh, we're in your basement. We're in your basement now. Okay.
It's the secret tunnel, man.
Like, cool.
They're not explaining any of the magic. I'm still confused of what those pages are. Why did the pages? So what's happening now?
I don't disagree.
Like,
I think those explanations are coming. I think we're going to find out a lot more when Moms and little D get to Devon County.
Yes.
Oh,
there's
I kept thinking.
There's one line in there that I think is preamble, and that's when Hippolyta's talking to her husband, and she starts talking about, well, maybe they're not eclipsing, maybe it's 2 suns. And he goes, "Oh, now you sound like that comic book she's writing." And so now we're saying, oh, that could have just been an offhanded comment, but it could also be the case that this comic book, her power is going to come to the fore. And she's also the youngest one in the family, right? Her power is going to come forward in a way that takes us in a different space. Okay, that's really me watchmening this thing, but I really think there's something there.
I would love to see this story turn to, I would love if like there was a full episode related, just dedicated to Hippolyta and little Miss Diane. I would absolutely love that, because there's something, I just feel like there's something that we're being foretold, something about those 2. And
I want them to go to Devon County and come back with George.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we have no reason to give a darn about anybody else but Ruby.
They were all placeholders to episode 6. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's coming up in the next episode? Is Ruby working as a... Is that what it is, Vanessa?
I don't remember anything from Sunday night. I was so tired Sunday night.
Do you think that he, I'm going to go vampire lord. Do you think he bit her neck when they were on the stairwell?
I have no idea.
I don't want to like give it away from what was in the book, but he put some in her blood. That's gonna
there you go.
Have some changes. I don't know.
Now I think that's what I was thinking. That's why I think there's so much more that has to happen that's going to happen here.
Yeah.
And again, like I said at the beginning, I was on the fence with this episode, but I think it's a great, if it's going to do what I think it's going to do, I think it's a great setup to the next few episodes.
Okay, so another thing that I really liked about this episode, where there was like not very much to like, was all the comedic relief. So Tree, every time he was on screen, hilarious, but my favorite comedic relief was in the library with that little boy, and he kept telling him to be quiet, and then he kind of, I just feel like in a show that's so heavy, like we talked about last week how some of the like really campy, like not scary horror elements give you like some sense of relief. And I think this week it was really treat. Just even when he walked up trying to get in the car with them, it's already like 19 people in the car. And he's like, I want to go too. And then that little boy in the library, it just warmed my heart. And also because he was small with his glasses, and that's like Atticus when he was younger. It was just, I loved it. It gave me all the feels.
I totally agree. He was reading Journey to the Center of the Earth in the library. Come on, adults. This is what we're supposed to do here. You're getting in the way of my reading, man. I know. That was fantastic.
He was so cute.
I got a question for you guys. As the scene was backing out, was that a picture of Du Bois on the wall? If you remember, there was a picture of a man on the wall as they were walking out, and it looked like Du Bois to me, but I couldn't tell.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I don't think that's an accident either, right? In other words, this is this young man reading Jules Verne in a library. Don't you get in my space? It's my book. And that's not unlike the kind of vibe Du Bois was about. You know, being yourself, creating a space for us to be who we want to be. So I just thought that was really cool. So I'm going to go over my favorite line here, and it's actually the dialogue of that whole first sequence, because I'm going to read it in the order because I think the order was important, right? So it first starts off with this guy in the television saying, if the United States fails to proliferate its stockpile of nuclear arms, the barbaric Soviet Union will wipe out civilized America. We have entered a new global age. And I just love Montrose is sitting there and he says to himself, ain't shit new about it. Why do you keep cooking up death for the rest of us to eat? Just boom. And, you know, Byron, you've been talking about the Watchmen in this show doing a rewriting. And the Cold War was a dominant narrative in the United States from the 50s through Reagan, right? And that was like the narrative that dominated America's relationship with the rest of the world. And what I love about that scene with Montrose is it's just letting everybody know, okay, that may have been your story. And there's a whole other story inside that you weren't even thinking about when you were building all of these nuclear weapons to take care of the threat of the Soviet Union. And then Montrose, then there's this montage, and he's crying, he's drinking, he's looking at pictures. And some of the phrases that come out are, I don't need your advice when it comes to raising my son. He might not be yours. Please, I promise, Dad, I won't do it again. I said, pick a switch, pick a switch. So all of that is wrapped up in regret about Atticus, right? And interestingly enough, he refuses to express that level of regret in that way to Atticus, right? For Atticus, what he's going to do is show the love that he shows in a couple of scenes, or he's going to show his anger. But for some reason, that vulnerability he has about raising his son never comes out in the moment with Atticus. And I do think that is going to be a second, third act thing that happens. He's going to show his suffering to Atticus in ways that he hasn't seen it before. And then they go through the whole thing. They read the book of Adam. No, it's the book of the order. Anyway, Adam named, Eve had sex, God brought forth monsters, monsters devoured, God smote Eve. And then you see bylaws and precepts of the order of the ancient dawn. So they have laid out their mission for the world right there in 4 simple phrases. And then the guy comes back in, the only way for us to defeat the Reds is to destroy their stockpile. Montrose then burns the book, right? So I don't think that all of that is an accident. I just loved the montage way that they talked about his suffering, because when you are in those states, you're not having coherent, long, sustained thoughts. Thoughts are interrupting thoughts. Thoughts are breaking thoughts. And that's part of the despair. That's part of the suffering. And I just really like the way they gave us that insight to his character, because he can't pin his suffering down to just one thing. And then when he says, smells like Tulsa, it's like, drop the mic. Just drop the mic. It's over. And they could have put that scene in any of the first 4 episodes. And they put it here. And I just thought it was stunning. Now,
then I'll just stop there. I thought it was great.
No, it was really great.
I think what you said too about vulnerability is, again, not to therapize everyone, but I think a lot of the times, I tell my clients, like, vulnerability is the key to therapeutic change, like shared vulnerability. So whatever angst you're experiencing, that relief comes through vulnerability. But that's so difficult for a lot of people, but especially when you think about, you know, Black people in this age in which this was set, like, when is it okay to let your guard down and be vulnerable and be open and be raw emotionally? It's not. And so I think that, you know, when you read about like Black psychology and sort of like Black mental health, a lot of it is that, like, we have to be so vigilant all the time that it's hard to shut that off, even in our most intimate of relationships. And so a lot of, you know, therapy is about like, okay, we can quell that a little bit in these intimate spaces. And so I think that's why, again, Michael K. Williams, amazing. But I think that that was such a beautiful depiction of what it's like to suffer. And when the thing that you want to do, you can only do by yourself, which is cry, be raw emotionally, and let it out. But that's the thing, you know, you need to do outside of that space to like better relationships and better yourself, I guess. But it's like, why there? I can't do that because it's scary, you know?
So I'm going to ask you a question as a therapist. When someone can only suffer alone, is that has to be indexical of despair. That has to be the point where they don't have someone else they can share their suffering with. Because we've not seen any character. No, we don't know what happened in the back seat with him and George. We don't know, because you know George knew Montrose's history. You know, and I believe they were both in Tulsa together. So you know there's a shared history there. But I'm just, in the therapy, so you acknowledge, you try to figure out, are they suffering alone? Do you try to move them to be able to express their suffering to other people in their lives? Because we see the suicide rate in kids coming back from Afghanistan, and it's just ridiculous, right? We got a culture where less than 1% of the people are actually involved in this thing that's been going on for 2 decades. And these kids don't come back. We tell them they're heroes, but I gotta be careful. Part of what we're saying is we don't want to hear it. We love you, thank you, but they don't get to suffer. And not only just suffer, but suffer with their partners, with their families, because suffering in front of people makes them either help you or say, whoa, wait a minute. So is part of the issue in therapy getting them to be able to express suffering to others? Or
if that's their, and this is just me speaking as an existential therapist, but I think that if that's their choice, but everyone has to have a choice in that. Like, I will never privilege or value suffering in relation to suffering alone, because I think that's a decision everybody has to make for themselves. Because for some people, where can you go? You know what I'm saying? Like with Montrose, I think that's what we see with him. Is he's like, where George is gone, where do I go? And so I think that in therapy, like, sometimes you have your therapist and that's it. But I can't. I'm here 1 hour once a week for 1 hour. So I think that it's not necessarily about getting people to a place where they suffer relationally, but getting people to a place where they can understand the potential outcomes of whatever path that they choose. So you can choose to suffer alone. That might lead to this, and this. Right. Or you can choose to suffer in relation with this group, with me as a therapist, with all these people, and that might lead to this, and this. But ultimately, that's your choice to make. No one can make it for you. And whatever choice you make, I'm just here to help you like cope with that. I'm not here to tell you what to do.
Yeah, when I hear you say that, I think that may be the Act 3 kind of resolution we see, where Montrose starts to see Atticus as a shared experiencer of suffering. I mean,
that also speaks to the intergenerational trauma and anxiety, especially in African American communities, that trauma that is passed down to your children. I mean, my parents were immigrants to this country. My mother immigrated from Jamaica, and she grew up under British rule and all the, humiliation and poverty and dehumanizing instances and experiences that come with growing up under colonialism. And I remember
Yes.
my first experiences in therapy were unpacking all my parents' stuff before I even, started unpacking my own stuff. So I kind of understand Montrose's reluctance to be vulnerable in front of his children,
Yes.
his harshness with Atticus, how fiercely protective he is, but also so very quick to criticize and almost shame his son. I mean, it really mirrors a lot of how I grew up. And it did take a while to sort of realize that harshness that I when you're young and you don't understand as a kid, you just think that you've done something wrong, or your parents are, horrible people, or they're very, very mean. And it really took a while to realize that, it really wasn't their fault.
Right.
And, but I mean, and that anxiety, that is something that I have, my siblings have, my niece has, what I mean? It's something that we've passed down. And I think that Michael K. Williams's performance is really indicative, and a really, really beautiful
It is
explanation and illustration of that.
And then there's a psychological term that was coined by Dr. Maisa Akbar. She's a psychologist based out of Connecticut, but she wrote a book about it. It's called Urban Trauma, but it's basically tracing the intergenerational trauma that Black people in America have experienced, starting back from slavery, and how that has penetrated generations beyond. So, in the Black family, how we view things because of what happened in slavery, and how family is more than biology, because there would be times where your biological kin would be sold, and you just have to get in where you fit in. And so she wrote an amazing book. Again, it's called Urban Trauma, but it's exactly what you're describing in terms of intergenerationally, not only how that trauma is passed, but how sometimes what we would call not so healthy coping mechanisms are what I would say not so healthy in a white people sense, but these are passed because it's okay, and this all stemmed from slavery and the atrocities that Black people have experienced since they were forced to step foot in America. And it's, when you think about it like that, longitudinally, it's wild. And that
even knowing your own family history, and I can't speak for anybody else's family, but when my family talks about our line and our family's past with slavery through the Caribbean into Africa and the British Isles, it's the saddest stories. These are the most upsetting stories that I've ever heard. I mean, it's, how can you not? I mean,
I wonder then, for me, and this is an interesting conversation, because for me, I mean, I have to go back to that line, smells like Tulsa, because, again, like you were saying, maybe for me now, my understanding of maybe the show moving forward is this notion of trauma, intergenerational trauma, right? Because it's taking a different, or maybe the same kind of trajectory as Watchmen. Possibly,
exactly.
Where we have to remember, maybe this is the case, that that's the line that has to be remembered as Montrose deals with this through the rest of the season, possibly, right? That this is trauma, and that this is, excuse me, that this kind of controls the way he navigates through the rest of whatever's going to happen, right? That there is this link to, when he says it smells like Tulsa, I mean, for me, is that saying that he was there?
Oh, that's exactly what I took from it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I took from it.
It's a little different. No, they were there.
And olfactory memory smell memory is the most robust form of memory. It'll instantly transport you to the past much more quickly than any other form of memory. So I do think he is the Lou Gossett of this show, and I do think he is the hooded justice of this show, and that's why I think we're going to find out that he's part of a larger campaign to bring down the order.
I think that I think that we are moving towards an exploration of the one character that is most noticeable in her absence, which is Atticus's mother.
Yeah.
Atticus's mother, actually, what's interesting is that she is in the background of so many other characters.
Yes,
she's
she is.
she's in the background of Montrose. You know, we don't have proof, but we pretty much have come to accept that she and George actually sired Atticus, right?
And when George was dying in the car, I mean, they pretty much confirmed it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that really all these other stories are really just echoes of her story. And so I'm curious as to how they are going to realize that, because you know, there's all these references with Montrose talking about, well, your mom was really difficult, or, you know, but he actually went to his wife's history. Why are you know, like there is, I think that's the real story, and that's where we're leading towards. And I'm really curious to see how they do it. And especially because what's happening is that her being taken out is actually very much tied to everybody else's trauma right now.
Another thing is that it's really interesting when we talk about emotion and we talk about anger. You know, we unraveled something in this conversation where we talk about, you know, how Montrose, you know, is reluctant to show this vulnerability and his emotion towards his son, but everything that Montrose does is extremely vulnerable and extremely emotive. And sometimes we don't look at anger and frustration as an emotion. He is an emotional wreck, whereas somebody like George, who allegedly has it all together and he's got a wife and kid, as far as we know, he stepped out on his wife and he betrayed his brother. So I think it's really, really interesting. I don't know. I just think that dynamic between the two brothers and how they present is really, really, really interesting. Yeah. Because it's like, as we talk about Montrose, it's like, wait a minute, he's an incredibly emotional person. He's just got like emotions spilling out of him all over the place. And he's screaming, and he's definitely screaming out for help. And it might not be in a language that we understand. And sometimes anger is vulnerability. Sometimes frustration is vulnerability. Sometimes those violent actions are people crying out for help. You know, it's just about how we receive them.
Yeah, and it draws on, you know, it also draws, as you were talking, see, I started thinking about like the way this draws on, and maybe you all didn't have this, but I know after my grandparents died, I mean, we found out a bunch of family secrets about who was whose child. Right, on both my mother and my father's side of the family, right, and that has a pretty huge impact on certain parts of your life. Yeah, right. Your history, your not knowing different family members, but other secrets that are still there, right? That I know my family we're trying to work through, right, and trying to find out. You know, I mean, we had apparently my mother's grandfather had two families that lived right across the road from each other. Wow. And you know, who looked completely different, because my grandfather's wife that my mother knew was a darker skinned woman. My great grandfather passed for white, could pass for white basically. But then his wife on the other side of the road was very fair skinned, right? So all those kids were very fair skinned. So it's just all these secrets. And then, you know, my great grandfather owned a lot of land in Alabama, but it was, we're now doing some investigation because that land was supposedly, they didn't pay the taxes on it and it was taken from them. That's the story, right? And so, you know, it makes me think within this show also, there's all these, you know, we know, we're pretty sure that George is Atticus' father, right? So I mean, we're pretty sure of that, but I don't know, it just makes you think about all these kind of generational secrets also, and then maybe how that ties into this kind of trauma and lack of confidence, you know, for Atticus and who he really is, right?
I mean,
but also something that Malthus deals with.
I think my sisters and I definitely combat that secret, you know, that I just grew up, you know, my parents were born in the early, like 1940, and I was an accident. And, you know, it's just a generation that, you know, you just get out of the room, adults are talking, they just, you know, I didn't know my parents on a very personal level. And I think my sisters and I tend to probably overshare with learning my niece. But I mean, when my father died and I was 21, 22, and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, the funeral is at like in 4 hours, and we're still working on my dad's, on the eulogy and on the programs. And, you know, I'm the youngest of 3 girls, but I have 2 siblings in Liberia. And we're like, do we put that in well, of course we have to put that in the eulogy. Everybody was sitting at the funeral like, it's just something that nobody knew about. I'm like, yeah, I mean, when you get older and when people pass on, my gosh, those secrets come flooding out, don't they?
So maybe this episode, you know, maybe I'm on the other side of the fence now with the episode. Maybe I like it. I think maybe I'm liking it more.
I think I do too.
We have an effective podcast. We hash these things through and we find the hidden kernels of goodness.
That little boy in the library did it for me. I loved it after that.
I love that scene. Didn't he cuss too? Did he say?
No, he just side-eyed them. He was like, shh.
And his glasses were so cute. Oh my gosh, it was so cute.
That was so awesome.
Underneath the
Any final comments? All right then. So that about wraps it up for us for tonight's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Brothers and sisters, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media. And we will begin with Byron.
So I'm Byron Craig, and you can find me at Twitter at Byron B. Craig, all one word, or on Instagram at Byron Steve, and I'm on Facebook at Byron under Byron Craig.
Very cool. Stanford.
You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Just go up under SW Carpenter, or you can just do it the easy way and just go Stanford Carpenter. Because while there are lots of Stanfords and there are lots of Carpenters, there's only one Stanford Carpenter.
I'm Cianna Greaves, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CC Greaves. That's at CICIGREA, V as in Victor, E as in Sam. Please like my post. Don't just join and not like anything.
Oh, well said. Well said.
Really annoying.
Vanessa.
I am Dr. Vanessa Hintz. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter at Dr. Vanessa Hintz, on Instagram at Dr. Vanessa Hintz.
Well, there you go.
Period.
And I'm Scott Jordan. You can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the Seers of Ardham at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast, please leave it below on this YouTube page or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs, and remember,
keep hope alive.
For the show.
It's only no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing brain drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing.